Geeks and geekettes, welcome to another thrill-packed, adventure-loaded episode of Ask Chuck Dixon. A day late, but not a dollar short. You'll get everything you came here to see and hear, or you'll get your money back. Okay, let's get to the first question. I don't want to waste a second of your time. No housekeeping and folderol. Let's just jump into it with Garrett Davis, who asks, what was your earliest memory of European comics and manga? I've been reading European comics like Thorgal and Jeremiah, as well as manga like Fist of the North Star and Crying Freeman lately. So I felt compelled to ask an older comic reader and writer such as yourself. My first exposure to European comics was really Asterix and Obelix. Extraordinarily popular comic series out of Europe. And its popularity was such in so many countries around the world that there was an aborted attempt to run it as a newspaper comic strip in the United States. It didn't last long. It disappeared out of our newspaper within a few weeks. It didn't work because shrinking the art down to early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, comic strip sizes, just lost all of the charm. Plus, running it in black and white, the translation probably wasn't very good. I don't remember. It just didn't work in that format. This is something that needs to be seen in color in a comic album, European comic album. But it made me curious. Wow, there's comic books in other countries. And I found that as much as I could through the buyer's guide, comic book buyer's guide, which was really the only source of information on comics at the time. And when I went on a high school trip to Germany in 1971, I picked up every single Asterix volume in print at the time, obviously in German. My German wasn't that good. After 4 years of high school German, I couldn't really read it that much, but I could, the art was gorgeous, obviously, and I could follow the stories. And I did learn that Erdbeeren mit Schlagsahne was the German word for strawberries and whipped cream. So I learned something as well. But European comics were very, very hard to find here. And but eventually, in the early 70s, stuff began to appear. Metal Hurlant magazine, which became heavy metal here in the United States, began to show up at comic book conventions and eventually comic book shops. Pilote magazine as well, which is more of a kind of combination between Mad Magazine and National Lampoon. Pilote magazine, I don't know if Pilote magazine still exists, but they began to show up at the more esoteric newsstands in Philadelphia. So I was able to pick it up. You had to order it, and I had to, pick it up once a week, or sometimes a friend would pick it up, because a lot of us were subscribing to Pilote through this newsstand and distributing it. So that exposed me to a lot of different things, including, most memorably Valerian, which is one of my favorite European comic series. And Valerian appeared regularly in Pilote. That's where it was serialized before it was collected in the graphic novel form. So, but of course, again, these are in French, so I really couldn't understand what was going on entirely. But my first exposure to manga was some friends of the family were taking a trip to Hawaii, and I had heard about Japanese comic books, and I knew this is like 1969, and I knew that Hawaii was a big tourist destination for Japanese tourists, and I just assumed, hey, there might be Japanese comic books available in Hawaii, and so I asked, these folks, hey, if you happen to go by a newsstand and see any comic books in Japanese, would you grab them for me? And I usually did this with anybody traveling overseas. I can't tell you how many times people came back from Europe or South America, friends of the family or family members, and they brought me, foreign editions of DC and Marvel. And it's like, I very politely thank them, but that's not what I was looking for. I was looking for comics from those regions. But these folks who were visiting Hawaii came back and brought me one of these big telephone book, thick, I can't remember what it was, Shonen Jump or something. I don't know what it was, but there was one of those enormous, monthly comic anthologies from Japan. And I just blew my mind because, the stuff was so different. But of course, manga was nearly impossible to find here in the United States. And until I found there were a number of Japanese bookstores in New York City when I was visiting the children's book publishers and the comic book publishers looking for work. And of course, the greatest of all of these was Kinokuniya, which was right near the DC offices, right near Rockefeller Center. And Kinokuniya is like a Walmart of Japanese culture, CDs and books and manga and all the rest of it. And I would leave there with just, armloads of stuff that, once again, I couldn't read, but I certainly enjoyed looking through. Goggle 13 was the one that made the biggest impression on me. Still one of my favorite manga series that you can actually follow. Even I mean, a number of them have been published in English. Not near enough have been published in English, but even in Japanese, Goggle 13 is so well put together. You can kind of 80% follow the story just through the pictures. But there you go. Those are my earliest exposures. Boy, this stuff was hard to find. And remained hard to find for a while, particularly English language editions. I'm so pleased that more and more international comics are available to English-speaking audiences now. It's a good time. It's a good era for comic book fans right now because almost everything's available. Okay, Voluntarist Hero. I read The Great War of Separation #1 and loved it. I haven't read 2, but I can't wait to read it. My question is pertaining to handling politics and stories. The topics covered in the book were pretty similar to real world issues. How do you go about writing a very political story like this without making it seem as though you're pushing a political agenda? I think, you got to look at a story like this. It's a political thriller. It's a war story. It's a lot of things. But when you're dealing with politics, you have to look at the issues involved, and how do they serve the story? How are they grist for a story? Where is the drama here? Where is the conflict? And in politics, there's lots of conflict. Generally, what I do is I will present the issues, but not tell you how to think about them. I think that both liberals and conservatives can read The Great War of Separation and be entertained. I think for conservatives, it's a rah-rah kind of experience. And for liberals, it's probably like a horror movie. But I don't do anything. I don't do anything consciously to make you choose one side or the other. I mean, you may be, cheering on the decisions of Governor Sanders in the book, or you may be, just appalled by everything that he does. But I try hard not to insert myself. I mean, I think anyone here listening, anybody familiar with my political views, knows where I stand and know who I probably sympathize with in the story. But as a writer, I've got to hide that. I've got to put that aside. And so many things in the Rippaverse, because we're free to deal with this alternate reality and create our own, landscapes. We're going to deal with things like that. I mean, and it's kind of neat because Rippaverse allows me to create like morally conflicted characters like the Horseman. Is the Horseman the good guy or the bad guy in his story? He certainly comes off as relatable, but a lot of his actions might be questionable to someone. And I think it makes it really, really interesting. And my job as a writer, I'm an invisible hand writer, And I believe my job is to sink as far into the background as possible, to work as hard as I can to make it so that you're not aware you're reading a story, that you're just experiencing the events in it. So I don't insert myself here or tell you what to think. I mean, a perfect example of this is when I was on Robin the Boy Wonder, the monthly series at DC for 100 issues and miniseries and specials and annuals and 80-page giants and everything else. I wrote literally thousands of pages of Robin. And because he was a teenage character, Denny O'Neil was my editor throughout most of my run. Because he was a teenage character, I thought, well, he's going to deal with teenage issues. And we can't ignore them. This isn't going to be Archie comics. This isn't Here Comes Scooter. It's Robin the Boy Wonder, and he's living as a high school student, going to an urban public high school. He's certainly going to deal with issues like teen suicide, teen pregnancy, guns in school, drugs, alcohol, things like that. And I talked with Denny about it, and I said, I'm not an issues kind of guy, because Denny knew I didn't like writing relevant comics. I'd certainly made enough fun in front of him of his Green Arrow, Green Lantern run. We had a lot of fun with that. So I said, I want to deal with these issues, but I want to deal with them in a way that only serves story, that only creates stories. And I don't want to tell the reader what to think. And because Denny was, Denny was a classic bleeding heart New York liberal, which is a different breed of liberal, but it's a tougher breed of liberal. He understood, and we were on opposite sides of the political spectrum. We had to find some common ground, and our common ground was story. Does this serve the story? And I think the most emblematic of all of these agreements we had, basically I'm collaborating with the editor to create something special, something believable, and as far as the superhero comic goes, something that feels authentic. I think the best example is the spoiler, where Stephanie Brown learns that she's pregnant, and how is she going to deal with this? And I presented the options of adoption and abortion and all the rest. And I thought I presented them in a way, and I know I did, that didn't tell you how I felt on the issue. I had very strong feelings on the issue, but I didn't present them. It was all about Stephanie. And mostly what I wanted to put across is what a burden this was, what a difficult choice this was for a young woman. And really, no one could help her as much as Tim Drake, Robin, tried to help her make this decision and feel good about the decision she made. It was ultimately up to her. And yes, it was a cautionary tale for teenage girls, and teenage boys as well, because they're the ones getting the girls pregnant. And the emotional weight that this would put on a very young person who was not prepared to make these kind of decisions in life. And that was really the thrust of the whole story. Not to tell you if I was pro-life or anti-abortion or whatever, but to present this story so that you could, walk a mile in her shoes and feel her emotional angst over this whole thing, and then bring it to a reasonable conclusion. I was happy with the end results, and Denny was happy with the end results, and the readers were happy with the end results. So there you have it. I mean, it can be done. You can deal with politics without pissing everybody off. Tim Adams is here with, I have a general writing question for you regarding world building. For me, this is the most fun part of the storytelling process, but I end up getting too caught up in it to actually create story. Do you have any advice for knowing when you have enough world building done and how to move on from there? There's two different ways of world building. One of them is to get all of your ducks in a row, figure everything out, draw a map, literally draw a map, do J.R.R. Tolkien, and figure everything out. all the way down to what are the buttons on their tunics made out of? How many different breeds of dragon are there? What do they like to eat? You know, different languages and all. I mean, you can really work hard and just build and build and build and build. But like you said, does that get in the way of your story? Are you putting up fences? Are you putting up obstacles, hurdles for yourself by making your world that picayune, that detailed, that granular, that you sort of lost sight of the prize, which is a story with a beginning, middle, and end, and characters you care about, and exciting events, and suspense, and drama, and all the rest of it. So with that in mind, I think there's two ways of going about doing this. And one is, like I said, the granular way, which is not the way I do it, making outlines and writing up Bibles and things like that. And the other way, which is the way I do it, is decide on what tone you want for your environment. That's the most important thing, really, isn't it? For story purposes, because you're not building an actual place. And you're not building a gaming environment. You're building a story environment. So tone is really, for me, the most important thing. Do you want your environment to be a land of mystery and intrigue? Do you want it to be dark and dismal, a place of dread? Or is your universe a happy place filled with optimism and pleasant people and blue skies and everything's going to be all right in the end? So you kind of have to decide which direction you want to go in, and your environment, your universe becomes a character in the story. I mean, Gotham City is it's very present in the stories. I mean, Batman doesn't take place in just any old city. It takes place in Gotham City. And over time, Gotham City's developed this rich history, and it developed this mood in all of our minds. It's like this shared experience of this place that doesn't exist. And we can see it and feel it. And this is true of any successful fiction. If it's the plantation Tara in Gone with the Wind, or it's Helm's Deep in Lord of the Rings, we want to feel as if we can walk around in that place. But it doesn't take that much detail. Your readers are going to fill in a lot of the stuff. If you get the tone right at the beginning, the atmosphere of the place you're creating, your readers are going to come along. And they're going to fill in the blank spaces. Now, I understand in a comic, you've got to have visual reference and everything else. But in prose writing, you can leave an awful lot of the visualizations up to the reader. You just put a few hints in their mind, and they can see this place. They can walk around in this place. And so there you have it. Maybe in your own writing, stop thinking so much about the details. Let that stuff come later. Think more about the tone, and when you do that, it'll inform you more about the place. I mean, when I created Bloodhaven, I wanted a down on its knees, down at its heels, failed city, and I based it on cities that I knew and everything else. But I didn't go into a whole lot of detail, other than the fact that the only really granular detail I went into was that I wanted the streets named for whaling terms and the avenues named for hard-boiled crime raiders. So that, I would never be at a loss to name locations, to name intersections in Bloodhaven. And that's really as far as I went, except the other detail about Bloodhaven is that every major transportation conveyance passes it by. The turnpikes and freeways and rail lines and everything else just pass Bloodhaven by because nobody wants to get off there because it's such a rotten city. And you see, by coming up with that tone, that feel for the city, it informed everything else I did. Everything else I did came from there. And so maybe you need to like turn this on its head and stop Lego building and start thinking about the overall feeling that you want your universe to give your readers. I hope that was helpful. As I said, I don't do, discuss this I think a little later, I don't like doing how-tos, but all I can do is tell you how I do it. And maybe that'll spark something in you, or you'll just go, you're full of it. I'd never write that way. You don't know what you're doing, Chuck Dixon. Even Aguila, there were 2 questions about the movie that you didn't answer, the movie being, I assume, A Working Man. Did you see anything from the movie before the premiere? I mean, of course, I'm not referring to teaser or whatever that everybody else could. Yeah, they sent me a link, and I could watch the movie. And this was like 2 months before its release. And at the time, it was called Leave on Cade. The print I saw, the title was Leave on Cade. They had not decided on what to call it at that point. So, yeah, I got to watch it at home on my big screen with my oldest son. So I did get to see it beforehand. And Ivan gets a twin spin. Yes, sir. He earned it. Okay, second question from Ivan about the movie is, how was the logistics to see the movie? I mean, did you get a free ticket, or did you have to buy your own ticket with your own money? I'm going to confess something right here. I never went to the movies to see it. My wife wanted me to. Everybody wanted me to. My son put together like a 40-person party, my youngest son, and they all went together and then went to dinner afterwards. And that was cool. And they, of course, invited me along, but there was something in it. I don't know, some weird emotional something. I didn't want to see it in a theater with an audience. I know that's weird. I can't really explain it, but I just would have felt extremely uncomfortable. I don't like being the center of attention. And I certainly would have been that evening with this huge party that my youngest son of it. And these were like, adults and younger people and everything else. My youngest has quite the network of, he's got quite the social life. He knows a whole lot of people. And, and he convinced them all to go with him to the movies this one Saturday night. But I couldn't do it. And then my wife was like, well, we'll go later in the week. And I just never did. So I have not. And I was really curious because the cut that I saw, it had placement music, like they took music from other movies, which my son and I were cracking up. We were watching it because we were recognizing where this music came from. They just did sort of filler music until the actual music was put in place. And so, and then I was curious to see if the final cut, the final theatrical cut, was any different than the one I watched. But I'm gonna have to wait. I'll get it. I'll get it on Blu-ray. I hope they send me some Blu-rays or some 4Ks. They've been very generous. Nobody's asked me this, but I asked if there were any tchotchkes. And the other day, all these boxes, I mean, big boxes, showed up on my doorstep. I mean, just a wall of boxes. And they were filled with a working man work vests and solo cups and bottle openers and tool belts and igloo coolers and all kinds of stuff like that. But no, they did a great ball cap with a woven logo. I didn't get any of them. I'll have to pester them. And but just tons of stuff. I mean, I had dozens of really nice Carhartt work vests with the working man logo embroidered on it. I mean, very, very cool. I've been distributing them to friends and family. But I mean, and how many igloo coolers does a man need? So my garage looked like I was running a organ transplant operation. But and then yesterday a whole bunch of posters showed up. Big old bunch of posters. So MGM Amazon's been really good about sharing the wealth there. Hopefully I'll get some 4Ks and Blu-rays in the mix as well. But thanks for asking. And once again, see the movie, read the book. And also, I mean, just as an aside, a tangent, this is my show. I'll go off on tangents if I want. I learned that, I mean, the international box office is slated to hit well over 100 million, which assures a sequel. And also, I learned yesterday that A Working Man was #1 on Amazon for rentals and buys for digital downloads for the last 2 weeks. So it done good. It did good. Joshua Ignatowski is here, of course. Welcome back. Welcome home. What are some of your favorite parts of seeing your book Levon's Trade come to life on the screen, and why? I hearing some of my dialogue, that was cool. It kind of surprising, to hear your words that you made up, years before show up in actors' mouths. Also, even more so, I was pleased that some of my action set pieces survived almost entirely intact from the book. The swimming pool scene and the fight inside the van are almost exactly what I wrote. So that was cool. That was kind of neat, and just the whole idea of something I wrote having tens of millions of dollars spent on it to bring it to the public as a movie. It's trippy. Hey, no surprise to anyone, Joshua gets a twin spin. Joshua, again with, in addition to stuff from your conversations with Sylvester Stallone, what's the coolest thing a celebrity's ever said to you? Stan Lee, I mean, he's a comic book guy, but he's a celebrity. He was a celebrity, right? I mean, absolutely. He said the coolest thing I've ever had said about me. He didn't literally say it to me. He actually said 2 wonderful things about me, one of which I can share and one of which I can't, because it another comic book creator doesn't come off so well in that story. So if I ever meet you at a convention or a store appearance, make sure to ask me about Stan's other nice thing that he said about me. But the one that made the most impression on me was I was working on The Governator, the aborted comic book series about Arnold Schwarzenegger as a superhero. And we all know why it got aborted. But Stan was basically producing that. He was presenting it. His creative team was putting it together. And I was on a conference call with him and a whole bunch of people in his organization. I don't think Stan Lee Media still existed at that time, but there were a whole bunch of people in his organization on this conference call, and it was like a Hollywood production meeting. And I've said many times how much I hate them, especially over the phone. They're a nightmare, and no one ever listens to you. So I'm on this conference call, and I'm getting hammered, and with suggestions and notes and every other thing from everyone at this conference call except Stan. Stan's not saying anything for a while, and they have, you should do this, you should do that, you need to change this, this has to happen, blah 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 blah. Make sure you include this, and eventually Stan goes, hey, lay off. Chuck knows what he's doing. That was it. I was impossible to live with for the rest of the week. So that's the nicest thing and coolest thing a celebrity has ever said, not to me, but about me. And yeah, I've met a lot of celebrities, but I can't remember anything, they said off the top of my head. I'll probably remember one, and I'll include it later on in another broadcast. McCran Comics. You say you generally default to visualizing Joe Kubert in your mind's eye, but the time you actually got to work with him, his layouts were nothing like how you thought they'd be. This is a bit esoteric, but are you able to articulate in what way, or is that too abstract? Yeah, working with Joe Kubert, I mean, wow. I mean, when Don Daly told me that Joe was coming around the Punisher offices looking, hey, you got anything for me? Uh, and then Don called me and says, you want to work with Joe? I'm like, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, an idol, and like you said, and as I've said many times, when writing, I sort of default to Joe Kubert in my head because Joe was a master storyteller and he used every tool in the comic book storytelling toolbox. Didn't matter what it was, if it served the story, he would use it. And so there's a fluidity, there's a liberating aspect to Joe Kubert's art. I mean, he just drew like he didn't give a damn. If it served the story, that's all he cared about. Did it drive the story forward? And, did it increase the drama? He never left anything undone. He never left anything under dramatized in his stories. And so it was so cool to get to work with him. And we worked not full script, but he wanted to work plot dialogue. But I worked out with him that, I'm not really comfortable with Marvel style. And I said, certainly I bow to your storytelling talents, your prodigious mutant abilities to tell stories. But I feel something is lost in translation between the artist and writer when you work Marvel style. And I explained a lot of what gets lost is the drama or even bits of humor in the story, because I get it back and I have no idea what anyone's saying. I have a general idea, and there's generally notes in the gutters in pencil to instruct me of what the artist was thinking of in a particular panel. And I said, but I really want to maintain that drama. I said, so Joe, is it okay if I write you a plot dialogue kind of story, but I include a lot of the dialogue in the most key scenes so that you have an idea of the drama within the exchanges? And Joe was like, I love that idea. That's a great idea. And I said, well, you're free to discard anything you don't want to use and whatever. I said, but I want you to understand the story that I'm trying to tell, and specifically that I'm trying to tell you, so that you know where I'm at, where my head's at. So we're both, pulling an oar in the same direction. He totally understood, very, very gracious about it. Left me an absolutely amazing message on my answering machine about how pleased he was to work with me. And the greatest compliment he paid me while working with him, I know this wasn't your question, but the greatest compliment he paid with me was he allowed me to keep his thumbnails. He had thumbnailed all the issues out on like typewriter paper, and he instructed Don Daly to give me them. And that is, he didn't give out a lot of original artwork. And these are not Joe Kubert originals, not finished drawings by any means, but boy, I was tickled to get them and still have them. Joe's own hand working out the storytelling of the story. Now, for the more esoteric, as you said, thing, I visualize pages as I write them. And of course, they never turn out quite the way because, the artist has his own approach. They have their own point of view. But the only important thing to me is that the proper things get emphasized, that mood is maintained, that the character's demeanor is maintained, that the personality comes through, and things like that. The actual blocking out of the panels, what they decide to make large panel or small panel, I sometimes suggest that, like you might want to do a large panel here. But I didn't get to do any of that with Joe. And so when I worked with Joe, I sort of pictured a Sergeant Rock story with the Punisher. And I didn't get a lot of that. I got some of it. I got some double page spreads and things like that. But I didn't get, if I remember correctly, I didn't get a lot of he used to do these pages where it would be long vertical panels across the entire page. And I didn't get any of that, I don't think. And, but yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter if the page doesn't turn out the way I pictured it, as long as it turns out right. And 99.9% of the time it does. I mean, I'm very, very pleased with the results. And as I've said before, many times, I'm not the kind of writer who takes the artwork and compares it to my script. I never do that. If it looks good as a comic, I'm pleased. My only request from any artist I work with is that they make me look like a genius. And they all work very hard to do that. So, I don't care if they changed something or altered something, if it worked, because once again, for the umpteenth time, the artist spends so much more time with that particular page, than I did writing it. It's easy for me to go, 1,000 spaceships invade Earth. Somebody's got to draw that, and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of thought, and I really appreciate that. And my recent collaborations with Frank Fosco, Frank is a very conscientious artist who puts a lot of thought into the work. And as we were doing our series, Something Big, the series is called Something Big. He kept coming back at me with questions and suggestions, mostly questions, well, why this, why that? And it made me think even more. It drew me even more into this world that we had created, because he was really thinking about the details, really thinking about the logistics and everything else. And it was a much, much better story for that, because I knew, at the other end, and same with Joe Bennett, same with, Graham Nolan, Gary Kloppus, Flynn Henry, lots of guys that I've worked with, that would come back with questions or suggestions, or, what about this? And it always makes the story better. In almost every instance, it was an improvement to the story. So, it's kind of weird that I'm writing basically words for a visual medium, but, there you go. I mean, this is what screenwriters must go through. They write a screenplay and then the movie comes out and it's altered from whatever they wrote, and for the good or the worse. In comics, it's always for the good. In movies, not so much. Hey, you get a twin spin too. Look at you, getting your twin spins on. McCran Comics again. In Writers on Comic Scripting, on Writers on Comic Script Writing. What a silly title. By Mark Salisbury. Published in 1999, you are one of the subjects interviewed on your process. Included in your segment is what is described as an extract from an anatomy of a comic book story, a writer's guide. Copyright and appearing courtesy of yourself and written in the first person with little asides. I have included a photo of this document below. In this excerpt, you delineate such things as opening, minor and closing action, as well as the two-beat action formula, aka the classic revenge plot structure. He continued, he says, what compelled you to write such a guide if you typically avoid how-tos and formulas for writing? This was like early days on the internet, and I was looking for content for my message board, back when I had a message board, my own website, and all that stuff. Remember those days of message boards? They were fun. There was nobody to tell you what you could or couldn't say. It was just a wild, wild west. It was crazy. And I was looking for content and things that people could discuss. I was using it mostly as a promotional tool. The only reason I had a message board at the time, I really didn't want to get into social media, but I thought I could use this to brand myself and bring the sales of my 3 DC titles closer together, which I did. I accomplished that. Within 6 months of the message board, Nightwing, Robin, Birds of Prey were like boom, 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 right there on the sales list. The Robin and Birds of Prey had risen closer to the sales of Nightwing, which was my best-selling book at the time. Anyway, I've lost track of your question entirely. What was your question? So that's why I wrote what amounts to a how-to, but it really was more of a, this is how I do it. And explaining the true beginning, middle, and end, and how to insert action. Because I was getting lots of questions on the message board about how do you get action into a story. A lot of wannabe writers and even some people working in the business at the time were asking me, how do you get so much action in your story? And so I felt compelled to explain. And that was really the origin of Anatomy of a Comic Book Story, to explain action set pieces and where they were, and minor and major action. Minor action, Johnny and Ben fighting in the Baxter building over the TV guide. That's minor action. Major action, Dr. Doom shows up and blows off the top half of the building. And I said you could sprinkle these things throughout the story, and how every comic book story should have at least 3 action scenes, be they major or minor. That kind of stuff. So yeah, that's why I was compelled to do it, to create content. Triple spin. McCran Comics is back with, was this an editorial or mandated in-house document to coach new hires or something along those lines? No, as I said, it began as just I wanted to create content for the site. The editors didn't have anything to do with it. The editor, the Denny in particular, was the one writing story guides and style guides for Batman. I don't know if Mike Carlin wrote them for Superman, or I know none of the other editors. I know the Green Lantern, Flash editors and stuff like that. They weren't doing that kind of thing. But I'll bet you Mike did have a style guide that he wrote, because he was Superman, big boy on the block. You gotta work when you're the group editor there. You got something to prove. It's a flagship title, as Batman was. So yeah, but I didn't write it as directed. McCran Comics again. I don't know why I didn't give you another spin, but since this page is described as an extract, was there more to Anatomy of a Comic Book Story than presented here? Is it still available to read? It's probably somewhere, deep buried in a hard drive. So yeah, it's probably out there somewhere, but I'd have to look for it. But there's your quadruple spin. A little bit late, as was this podcast. McCran again, he's back with, just digging in here. This is investigative reporting at its best. In the document, refer to the Punisher story wherein it cold opens with Frank plunging 35,000 feet with no parachute as an example, and rhetorically ask a Todd if he remembers that story. Who is this mysterious Todd? I can't think of anyone in Marvel editorial, and Todd Klein wasn't the letterer. Is this a typo for Tom, as in Tom DeFalco? No, it's not. It's my good buddy, Todd Fox. Todd's there grinning at us in the left hand of the screen there. And these are some of my Evansville pals, my good buddies that live in Evansville, Indiana, in the Kentuckiana region of the state. I see Teddy Haycraft and Jim Alexander. These are all, diehard fanboys. Some of my favorite people to hang around with. And the issue in question is this one, Punisher War Journal, whatever number, in which, as you said, it opens with Punisher being thrown out of a plane at 35,000 feet. Or I can't remember if he was thrown or jumped. And the reference to Todd is because back when I was working on Airboy, Todd Fox, who's an excellent comic book artist in his own right, pitched to me an idea for an issue of Airboy, a standalone one-shot issue. And it would have this scenario. Airboy is in a plane full of bad guys and gets thrown out and has to, without a parachute, to fall to Earth and has to survive. And that's the big suspense thing. Every page is him falling. And what does he do to get out of this mess? And I said to Todd, that is just an awesome idea. Absolutely awesome. But I never got to use it in Airboy. And the deal was that if I did use it in Airboy, that I would persuade Eclipse to let him pencil it. And that was the deal there. So I come along the Punisher War Journal, and I thought, wow, what an awesome Punisher story. He gets thrown out of an airplane without a parachute, but everyone else dies. He manages to kill everybody on his way down and survives. And I thought, this has got to be a Punisher story. So I called Todd and I said, I really want to use this story in the Punisher, but I don't want to, leave you out of it. So I'm going to ask I'm going to present you as the penciler on it. But that didn't go over. Don Daly was not that pleased with Todd's pencils at the time. And so I asked Todd, I said, can I just use the story and I'll credit you? I don't know if I think I gave him a nod in my credits in my script. I don't know if they made it to the comic. But Todd said, fine, that's cool with me. And but I made it up to him. Todd got to draw a number of Punisher issues later on, inked by the amazing Enrique Villagran, and it did some really cool stuff. I remember a really terrific payback story that we did together. I mean, some really what are considered seminal issues in my Punisher run were drawn by Todd. And Todd's so good at the crime stuff. He's so good at the shootouts and blocking out action scenes and stuff like that. It was a trip to work with him. And of course, Todd was the penciler on Alias and my Racer X run as well. Also, in both cases, working with Speedy Enrique Villagran on inks. But yeah, it was a great collaboration. Another thing about this issue was I knew nothing about parachuting. So I called a parachute school, skydiving school. I was living in Lancaster at the time and asked if I could come and talk to someone there. So I went over, I don't know if I've told the story before. I went over and I met with this guy at a small private airport, obviously, met him in a hangar. And I said, I have some questions about skydiving. And he said, what's this for? And I said, it's for a comic book, a Marvel comic book called The Punisher. And the guy's like, The Punisher? What is he, some kind of S&M guy? And I said, no, he's a former Marine who fights crime. And the guy says, well, I was in the Marines. And then the guy couldn't do enough for me. And he answered all my questions. If you read Punisher War Journal, you'll think I jumped out of an airplane. The details are all there. All the terminology and jargon and the science of the dive. You know, how long it would take, what Punisher would experience, everything else. And this guy filled me in on all the details. And I'm just, very, very thankful, very, very grateful for his time. And at the end of our little session, and I was getting ready to leave, and then he had a party coming to jump out of an airplane with him. He said, well, maybe you should go on a tandem dive with me someday. In other words, we would dive together. And I said, I don't know about that. And he goes, how much do you weigh? And when I told him, he said, yeah, okay, forget it. It's too heavy for a tandem dive. So there you go. There you go. A little background dirt in the comic book industry. How the sausage is made. Hey, if you have a question for me, suggestion, whatever, or if you just want to deep dive on a subject like McCran Comics did, which I really dug, trust me, you are not pestering me with those kind of questions. You want to go to brunobookstore@gmail.com. It's the most reliable way to reach me. Yes, I see your questions on Facebook and X and other places and in the comments below this video. But the most reliable way, the way you can be absolutely certain that I have read your question and weighed its possibilities, you got to go to brunobookstore@gmail.com. So that's it for this week. I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing and liking. And thank you for being just the most awesome collection of fans. I hate to say fans because I'm a fan too. Anyway, I just want to thank you for your participation here. Obviously, this couldn't happen without you. And the questions were great this week, as they always are. And I